Now, ladies and gentlemen, before, as I said, I introduce Yishai Fleisher, let me just give a little bit of background about today's webinar. First and foremost, we're going to run for about 75 minutes, so we'll finish at about 1:15 New York time. I do want to get your questions in. Now, there were a number of pre-submitted questions, but if you would like to ask a question live, please indicate that via the chat facility at the bottom of your screen, and we will seek to unmute your microphone and have you interface directly with Yishai if that's at all possible. Please do keep those questions coming. I'm going to try and open up to questions about 20 minutes before the conclusion. If you don't feel like asking questions live, I am happy to read out some of the pre-submitted questions. The other thing that I'd like to make clear is that the Miriam Institute is a forum for Israel-focused dialogue, discussion, and debate. We're very, very proud to be able to represent viewpoints from the left, center, and right of the mainstream political perspectives in the state of Israel. But even as we have done so, and even as we continue to do so, we have noticed that there seems to be a creeping groupthink that is emerging among the upper echelons of the Israeli security establishment. That groupthink tends to be predicated around an absence of a religious context being present when one speaks about the importance of the state of Israel, oftentimes an absence of a historical context, and generally a pervasive presence of a left of center attitude. And while we do absolutely recognize the legitimacy of those viewpoints, and we will continue to work to bring those viewpoints forward, as I'm sure you've noted in our commentary section, our webinars, and our podcasts, we felt it was very important, beginning at the start of this year, to start integrating individuals who actually front-load the historical context of the Jewish people's presence in the state of Israel, who actually front-load the legal rights of the Jewish people to be in the state of Israel, who actually proudly front-load the religious attachment between the Jewish people and the state, and yes, the land of Israel. And it's out of that context that I and the Miriam Institute, we are particularly proud to have Yishai Fleisher with us today. So just to give you a little bit of background about Yishai. Yishai Fleisher is the international spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron. He works closely with the US and Israeli legislators on issues such as fighting BDS, that's boycott, divestment, and sanctions, on recognizing Israeli indigeneity, curbing historical appropriation, and strengthening the Jewish people's presence in Judea and Samaria. Yishai was instrumental in the fight against UNESCO's efforts to characterize the tomb of the forefathers and mothers as a Palestinian World Heritage Site. He hosts a popular weekly English language podcast on Israel, Judaism, and the Middle East, and he's a frequent columnist for major news websites, including Newsweek, Midah, JNS, and the New York Times, and he has been featured on CNN, Al Jazeera, Fox, Vice, BBC, and more. Yishai earned his law degree from Cardozo Law School in New York City and his rabbinic ordination from Kollel Agudat Achim in Yerushalayim in Jerusalem. So with all of that having been said, Yishai, it's a real pleasure and privilege to have you. Thank you very much for being with us today.
It's absolutely a pleasure to be with you, Benjamin, and I've been following your career and all that you've done, and I'm excited to be together with you today speaking for the Miriam Institute.
Thank you so very much, Yishai. I'm really looking forward to learning from you. I'm really looking forward to engaging with you, but more importantly, I'm looking forward to having the opportunity come about for our audience to listen to you. Again, whether they're here live or whether they're on one of the postcast formats that we facilitate, because your viewpoint, which is a very important viewpoint, is one that I think a lot of people seek to stymie, one that a lot of people seek to dampen. That will not be taking place during this conversation. This is your platform to put your views forward, because we credit our listeners with having the intellectual rigor to assess those elements of what you say that they agree with, those elements that they disagree with, and to continue to engage in the dialogue by way of that. So please know that from the outset. I also want to say that I think the last time you and I met was at a carousel in Kennedy Airport. We were both collecting our suitcases. I think you were on your way to the APAC conference, if I'm not mistaken. I was on my way somewhere else, but we exchanged cards, and there's always been, from my point of view, a great admiration for the work that you undertake, Yishai, and I hope it goes from strength to strength. So let me begin, if I may, by reading a brief excerpt from an article that you published in July in 2020. And it was in response to Peter Beinart's op-ed, where he endorsed what I would say was the destruction of the Jewish state as we know it. That's how I would phrase that article. You wrote a wonderful paragraph there, and I'm going to quote it, and I'd like that to serve as the context for your first responses. You wrote, quote, "Judea and Samaria is the ancient cradle of Jewish civilization in modern times. The Jews lost this land to the Arab onslaught during the 1948 War of Independence, but liberated it from Jordanian occupation in 1967 and began to resettle. Now, 50 years later, over 500,000 Jews live here in Judea and Samaria under Israeli protection." So, Yishai, tell us, please, what Judea and Samaria mean to the Jewish people. And I'd like you to answer that in two parts. I'll ask you the second part in a moment. For your first answer, tell us what it means to the Jewish people, beginning, if you would, with the story of Abraham.
Right, that's a great place to begin, Benjamin, because in the end, it boils down to all of Zionism boils down to our ancient history, which gives us the legitimacy to be in this land. That is the call of the. I used to have a Greek landlord in New York City, and he once said to me when I told him that after Yeshiva University I want to go back to Israel. So he said to me, "Why? Why would you do that? It's dangerous there, et cetera, et cetera." And then he said to me, in his way, his name was Eddie, he said to me, "I guess it's the call of the blood, that there's something inside the Jewish people that calls us back to this land. This is where we're from. This is where all of our history was written." And our founder, which I happen to be quite close to since I work in Hebron, the place where the founder of the Jewish people, the founders of the Jewish people and of ethical monotheism are buried. Abraham came to this land 3,800 years ago. 3,800 years ago, and he heard the call of God. He left northern Syria today, southern Turkey, and he heard the call of God to come to what God termed the Holy Land, this land that God will reveal himself to Abraham in it. And he told him to walk it to its length and to its breadth, and to commune with God in this special land. That was Abraham's courageous step. He left idolatry. He left his father's house and the idolatry that was at his father's house. And he came to this land and he started teaching monotheism. And really, he discovered a way of following God. And the courage that Abraham showed back then kept going to his son Isaac, and then to his son Jacob, and their amazing wives. So Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. And they discovered a way to serve God. And their lives make up the book of Genesis, the book of Bereshit, right? The initial book. This is the book of stories of the sojourns of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob who became the 12 tribes. And it all happens here. The vast majority of those stories happen in a mountain range in central Israel, which is called, in the Bible, it's called Hara Emori, the Emorite mountain. And later on, it's going to be called Judea. That's really the official name of this area. And then later, Judea and Samaria. The heart of this whole mountain range is the city of Jerusalem, which is actually the geographic capital of Judea and Samaria. This is something that you never hear in the Hasbara language, is that Jerusalem is the very heart of this mountain range. And this mountain range has in it what I would call 7 holy cities or 7 historical cities. Holy and historical are often interchangeable because what's holy is historical and what's historical is oftentimes holy. And so you have Beersheba in the south, which is before the mountain range begins, but it's the south tip of it. And then it goes up north towards Hebron or Hebron, from there to Beit Lechem or Bethlehem, right? Important to so many people. And then, of course, Jerusalem, which is the central city of this mountain range, and it's of the 7. It's the middle one. And then after that, it's Beit El or Bethel, which is where Jacob had his dream of the ladder. And then Shiloh or Shiloh, which is where the tabernacle stood for over 400 years, and that's where the story of Samuel comes into play. And then finally, Shechem, or how the Christians would say Shechem, or how the Arabs would say Nablus, which is really a Roman name, Neapolis. And this is a city where Joseph is buried, and where also the Jewish people, when they came, when they crossed the river Jordan with Joshua to inherit the land, that's where they received the Torah once again, the famous mountains of blessings and curses, Har Eval and Har Grizim the mountains of Eval and Grizim. And so this mountain range is where like the core Jewish story happens from a biblical perspective, but not just, because in the Second Temple period, where already the Bible was not being written, so too was this mountain range the heart of the Jewish story. Jews were living all over what Israel is today was 2,000 years ago. But when you thought about the heart of the Jewish land of Judea, it was of course Hebron, and it was of course Beit El, and certainly Yerushalayim. These are the cities that make up the core story of the Jewish people. Now, Zionism, modern day political Zionism, was ostensibly a kind of secular movement. But really the truth is, what does that mean, secular movement? Where did Zionism base its whole movement towards the land of Israel on? Why didn't it accept Uganda? Because Zionism relied on Jewish history that's written in the Bible. For example, an avowed secularist like David Ben-Gurion was also an avid lover of the Tanakh, of the Bible, and he would walk around the land of Israel with his Bible. Now, when you walk around with the Bible, then these places become familiar to you, like Hebron. You say the word Hebron, you're like, oh yeah, that's where Abraham purchased a plot to bury his beloved wife Sarah. That's where the rest of the forefathers and mothers are buried. That's where Caleb came and got strength to disagree with the other spies who gave a bad report about the land of Israel. He came to Hebron. And you know that King David was king in Hebron for 7.5 years before he moves to Jerusalem. He was crowned king of Israel in Hebron. So the Bible, or Abraham, who starts our first family member, is key. And you don't have to be religious or observant. You don't have to be outwardly observant in any way in order to feel these things. I oftentimes tell people that Hebron is actually it fits perfectly the secular mindset, in the sense that it's about peoplehood. It's about the founders of our peoplehood. I always ask people, is Judaism a religion or is it a peoplehood? Well, first and foremost, it's a peoplehood because you can still be Jewish if you observe or not observe. And so therefore, but you cannot get rid of your Judaism, your Jewishness, because that's the kind of ethnicity and group that we are, the tribe that we are. And if we are such a tribe, then who is the founder of that tribe? Well, the founders, the first couple, is Abraham and Sarah. So you have this beautiful monument in Hebron, which is like Mount Rushmore in the United States. The difference is we don't have 4 men. We have 3 couples. And these are the founders of the first family of Israel. That's what I call them, the first family of Israel. And really, it's a city of love. Abraham loves God, and he also loves this land, and he loves his wife Sarah, and he's a man of love. Even though when he needs to make war, he makes war, but he's a man of love. So there's a connection between Abraham and the land, the God, the family, and so to the rest of the family. And that's why I call Hebron, even though in the news it may be portrayed as a place of a lot of violence and a lot of tension, I actually call it a city of love. Hebron, city of love. Because it's really all about that. And maybe we'll get to this later, it's also actually a city where, while today's situation is not like that, or mostly not like that, it's also a city where Arabs and Jews are meant to come together because of our joint father Abraham. And the Bible tells us that it was Isaac and Ishmael who together buried their shared father and honored their shared father. And I'm really hoping that we, through the advent of the Abraham Accords, which are really about brothers coming back together into a relationship, we'll also be able to come to Hebron and honor our joint father once again. Hold on one second. I'm not sure I hear you fully well.
Benjamin, you're muted.
Oh.
Benjamin, you have to turn on your sound.
Yishai, do you hear me?
I hear you now. Fabulous.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Sorry, that was on my side. I have somebody drilling outside of my apartment, so I mute the microphone, Yishai, and I forgot to unmute it. My
That's
mistake.
fine. That's
But I
fine.
really do appreciate you providing that context to us. It's incredible that when the international community hears a Jew espouse the biblical, the holy, the historical connection between him and that land, or her and that land, that is rubbished. But when the Palestinian Arabs do the very, very same, everybody is expected to be immediately deferential to that narrative. It's quite an incredible, incredible double standard, flagrant and overt. Now, with that having been said, Yishai, tell us a bit about what Judea and Samaria is today. Because I'm somebody who, when I made Aliyah, I first established my roots there, or re-established my roots in Rehavia, in Yerushalayim, and then I moved to Ma'ale Adumim. And then from Ma'ale Adumim, I moved to Givat Ze'ev. And then gradually I moved to the holy city of Bat Yam, which of course you know is the true holy city of the state of Israel. But prior to arriving in Bat Yam, I was certainly living in Judea and Samaria, very much enjoyed it. One of the things that I think people fail to realize is the incredible interaction, the positive interaction that takes place daily, actually, between Palestinian Arabs and Jews. One of the other things that I think people fail to realize is just the fact that these are not settlements, these communities in Judea and Samaria. The vast majority of them are really burgeoning and growing cities, in actual fact, communities in every shape and form. And also the character of the Israelis who live there is not singular. There is an array of individuals and families who live in Judea and Samaria, modern Judea and Samaria today. Tell us a bit about what Judea and Samaria looks like now, if you would.
Right. So, as I said before, it's a mountain range. That's a key thing to understand. It's where mountain Jews live. It's mostly a mountain range, but it's actually, now that I think about it, it's not exactly accurate, because there's a part of Judea and Samaria that's also the Great Jordan Valley, which is farming communities on this very dramatic rift, physical land rift between our mountain range and the next one over, which is the mountains of Moab, the mountains of Jordan. So we have a valley, and we also have the Dead Sea as part of it. But the vast majority is this mountain range. And this mountain range has, if you include the Jews that live in Eastern Jerusalem, we're talking about 600,000 Jews that live in these places. About 1 out of 10
Please,
Jewish.
I just want you to repeat the number again,
Yeah.
so people know that.
So 600,000 Jews live in Judea and Samaria. Let's put it this way. The places that the European Union may say are illegally occupied, which are ironically the very heartland of our history, there's about 600,000 Jews that live in these parts. And that makes up out of about 1 of 10 Jewish Israelis, meaning to say we have about 8 million citizens of the state of Israel, about 6 million are Jewish. So 600,000 of 6 million live in Judea and Samaria, and they live in very normative towns. You mentioned Ma'ale Adumim. I also lived in Ma'ale Adumim for a few years in yeshiva there, and you lived in Ma'ale Adumim. And so Ma'ale Adumim, if you go there today, it's 40,000 people living in a super normative part of Jerusalem. That's really what it is. It has buses that are like, every 10 minutes right to Jerusalem, and it's 20 minutes outside of Jerusalem. It's just a suburb of Jerusalem. And there are other big towns like Ariel in the heart of Samaria, not very far from the tomb of Joseph, but in the big town, which is far from being a religious town. It's actually a town that's populated by a lot of secular Israelis, including Russian Jews, who love the air of Samaria, because as you could probably guess, the mountain air is fresh and crisp and cool, as opposed to the coastal plain, which has more humid. You get the beach, like you mentioned before, Bat Yam. But generally speaking, the weather is a little bit more pleasant in the mountains, colder in the winter, but generally pleasant. So you have these big cities. Down by Hebron, we have a large city, not a very big city, called Kiryat Arba, which is the other biblical name of Hebron. And then within that, you also have more outlying places, so-called outposts, or places where Jews are homesteading the homeland. And they are smaller communities. There's also the big area south of Jerusalem called Gush Etzion, which has about 20,000 people living here, maybe even more now, in big cities like Efrat and Alon Shvut, etc. And they've become nothing less than than suburbs of the big Jerusalem center, while Ariel is actually more of a suburb of the Tel Aviv center, Tel Aviv metropolis.
I appreciate you saying that and outlining just what a bustling area the modern day communities of Judea and Samaria are. Let me ask you a question before I come to some of my prepared questions for you that just I want to bounce off you. A lot of people, I think words matter, Yishai. I really do think that words matter. And I think that one of the words that is a hot button word in the conversation about what we're discussing today, the future of Jews in Judea, is this idea of settlements and settlers. Now, I noticed as I was reviewing some of your writings, and I encourage people to read your writings regularly and often, that you actually use this word settlements and settlers. I don't, for example. This is just my view. I talk about communities as an example, but I'd like you to just tell me why it is that you use those words. The reason is I feel that having spoken on so many campuses in the US, and also, frankly, interacting with many a Jewish follower of the story of Israel, when people hear the word settlement, they immediately think about, a caravan that's pitched on a mountainside or some intrepid tent that's there. It's not reflective of what you've just described.
Right.
This is your time with our audience. Tell us about your selection of lexicon.
Oh, all excellent points you're making, and I too am. I don't have the British accent like you do, but words do matter. Words do matter. They matter to us, and they also matter to our enemies. Our enemies tag on words that are negative. And if you just go to something like an American debate, like pro-life or pro-choice, these things do not mean pro-life or pro-choice. They mean a whole set of values that come together with it. So you say the word settler, it's a negative word. It means an occupier, a foreigner, a type of person who is come lately and can be kicked off the land, and is really an interloper, a marauder, a thief, and that's the connotation today. And so, generally speaking, I absolutely agree with you. The correct language should be an indigenous person. Maybe worse comes to worse, the word resettler, where we're resettling the land that we were evicted from forcibly by the Romans, and have not had the opportunity to come back, but we've never finished our claim to the land. Reclaimants, there's other words for it, or more simply, Jewish people, Jews in Judea. Jewish people have rights in Judea, and that's where we're from. If Chinese people are from China, and French people are from France, Jewish people are from Judea. So you're absolutely right. However, I found for my own self that I wanted to use a trick that I remember from the LGBT battle, and that is that when I was a kid, the word gay was a negative word. Just it was like it was a slur. But I saw that what they did is at some point they took that word, the LGBT lobby, they took that word and they said, no, you know what, that negative word that you're using against me, I'm going to use it positively. And it's a powerful little trick. And what I decided at some point was to say, what you mean by settler is a foreign, white, interloping, occupying marauder. I want to say the brave folks that push back on jihadism, on land theft, on European involvement, the brave folks who with courage and with love come to the heartland of Israel and say, let's make it part of normative Israel. And they are in an effort to do it. It's not just, we're just living here. There is a fight. There is a battle for this land. There's a battle for public opinion. And so I said to myself, for example, I see here on the wall my article from the New York Times, and the New York Times article is called "The Settler's View of Israel's Future." There was no way I would have gotten that article in if I didn't identify myself as what I am, which is a representative of Hebron, a settler leader, quote unquote. So you're right. You're totally right that it is a negative, even a slur against us. And I would say you just didn't speak it out yet, but I know that you know this. The very effort to incorporate this term settler is the same effort that uses the ultimate word against us, which is occupation. The word occupation does not mean what job you have or that somebody's on the toilet on the plane. What it means is that you folks, you Jews, you are settlers / occupiers. You are not from here. You are not Middle Eastern people. You are just a European white people. This is the whites of South Africa. This is the French in North Africa. You guys are not from here. You don't belong here, and you're going to leave at some point. And that's one of the big words that I do fight against occupation. I don't let that one slide.
Absolutely.
But settler,
Mhm.
right. But settler I live with.
Yeah,
Settler
I just wanted to speak it out with you because I think I know something of your convictions. I'm constantly in this battle myself, and I really do bristle at the mention of the word settler. But I think you're right. I would go so far as to say it's highly unlikely that you would have gotten that article published in the New York Times had you not spoken in the terms that the reader exactly. Comes to the subject knowing. So I just wanted our listeners to know a little bit about that. Now, one more question before I come to some aspects of the future of Jewish settlement in Judea, which is the title of this talk. Hebron. It's very, very close to your heart. I don't believe you reside in Hebron at this time. Is that right, Yishai?
That's right. I lived for, when I came to Israel, I moved to Beit El, which is next to Ramallah. It's a quote unquote settlement next to Ramallah. It's a beautiful Jewish town in this very ancient place. Then I had the great merit to live on the Mount of Olives for 7 years, in the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, which was a beautiful thing to have the opportunity to do. And that's actually in a mostly Arab neighborhood of Jerusalem called Ras Al Amud. Today, I moved down to Judea, to Gush Etzion, in order to be closer to my job in Hebron. I had the great merit. The truth is that my wife and I got married in Hebron in 2002. We came from America from law school in our second year of law school, and we got married in Hebron. And many years later, as God willed it, my predecessor, David Wilder, left his position, and I got the gift of being able to represent Hebron, and again the tomb of the forefathers and mothers. And so living in Jerusalem was a little bit far, especially from the Mount of Olives, which was very trafficky to get out of the old city basin. So I moved down here to Judea, but indeed Hebron is very dear to my heart. You're right.
I know it is, and it's very dear to my heart as well. And as I've said, I spent several months serving in Hebron, operating in Hebron. It's very, very close to my heart, primarily because of my religious upbringing, much more than my service in Tzahal, in the IDF. So let's get a few numbers for people to know and to juggle with. How many Jews are in Hebron? How many Arabs are in Hebron? And also tell us about the linkage between Hebron and the Jewish people. You alluded to it a little bit in your answer to the first question, but it really is one of those places where you spoke about Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, our first prime minister, walking around with the Tanakh literally in his hand as he proclaimed Israel's right to the land of Israel, the Jewish people's right to the land of Israel. But Hebron really is one of those places where you can open up the Tanakh and you can see in front of you the birth sites and the establishment of the Jewish faith. Tell us a bit about numbers and tell us one or two examples of what's there for everyone to see.
All right, so Hebron is actually a very ancient city. It's one of the most ancient cities in the world. There's a few here in Israel, but when we talk about really ancient cities, we're talking about 4,500-year-old cities. So when Abraham comes to Hebron, it's already a 700-year-old city. Just kind of wrap your head around that for our audiences in places like the United States. Compare that to the city that you live in, how old it is. When Abraham comes to Hebron 3,800 years ago, it's already a 700-year-old city, and he makes a purchase of land there, and that's chapter 23 of the book of Genesis, book of Bereshit. It lays out in very Middle East style discourse the haggling that Abraham did with the Hittites in order to purchase a plot of land, which would be a burial sepulcher for the first Jewish family, and how much he paid for it, which is 400 silver weight. Now, the reason this is important is that he would not receive a gift. He did not want it to be free. He wanted to pay full price for it, to the point that just a few years ago, when Ayelet Shaked was the justice minister for the state of Israel, and she is not outwardly observant. She's traditional, but not necessarily fully observant. She proclaimed she stood in front of the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs, this place that Abraham negotiated for and bought. And she said, we have a legal claim. She's the minister of justice. She says, we have a legal claim to this land because of that purchase. And that's what we should continue to do. Numbers wise, today, Hebron, it has only 1,000 Jews. But in our sister city, Kiryat Arba, we have about 9,000 Jews. So we have a block of about 10,000 Jews, and there's about 200,000 Arabs that live in Hebron and more in the broader Hebron region. Hebron is a relatively large Arab town, and it is the wealthiest of the Arab cities. It is today controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And the Jewish community in Hebron is the only Jewish community within a town that's controlled by the Palestinian Authority. For example, the infrastructure, the garbage, and utilities mostly is controlled by the Palestinian city municipality of Hebron. And so that's who takes out our garbage. And so on the one hand, it's a great opportunity for living together, for coexistence. On the other hand, there is not a little bit of friction because, for example, the mayor of Hebron today, the Arab city of Hebron, is a guy by the name of Tiasir Abu Snena, who in 1980 was part of a team that killed 6 Jews, shot at 6 Jews that were standing outside of Beit Hadassah, one of the ancient old buildings of Hebron, Jewish buildings of Hebron. He shot at them and he killed them. Later, he was released in the Jibril deal and actually became an important person in Hebron. And today he's the mayor. How do we know it's the same Tiasir Abu Snena? He proudly uses that in his campaigns, that he's one of the team members that killed these Jews. So you can understand that we have a tension between a person like Tiasir Abu Snena and the strong Hamas component that is in Hebron. In fact, when I was at the White House, laying out to them why we believe ideas like the two-state solution are so problematic, one of the things I pointed out to them, I said, look at Gaza. We walked out of Gaza. We created a bastion for Hamas and for Iran to fire at Israel. That was on the coastal plain. Imagine if here in the mountain range, just a few clicks south of Jerusalem, we would have a Hamas-run city that would be firing rockets at the rest of Israel. We can't have that happen. On the other hand, I want you to know that Hebron is also home to completely different style thinking amongst the Arab population. And that is the monthly meetings that we, the quote unquote settlers of Hebron, have with Arab leaders who want nothing of the sort of leadership that Tiasir Abu Snena represents. What they want is decency, opportunity, freedoms, especially freedom of speech, which they're denied by the Palestinian Authority, and they want work. They want work. I haven't had now 2 Arabs say to me the following phrase, which I would never dare say myself. But I've heard it now twice said to me, which is these 2 Arab how do you call kablanim, contractors, said to me, they go, if there's no Arabs, there's no workers, and if there's no Jews, there's no work. That's what they said to me twice separately. And the meaning of that is we are an economic cooperative. We can work together so beautifully. And just a very important story for me, Benjamin, that I want to tell you. A little bit over a year ago, my beloved daughter Leah had her bat mitzvah, and she, being born of people who got married at Marat HaMachpelah, wanted to have her bat mitzvah at Marat HaMachpelah. Plus, she has some contacts there, so we decided to do it there.
Marat HaMachpelah is the cave of
Machpelah. That's right. That's right. The tomb of the forefathers and mothers. It's called in Hebrew Marat HaMachpelah, the cave of Machpelah. That's the site that I was alluding to before. In any case, my mother, being a Russian Jew and having certain Russian Jewish cultural traits, wanted fireworks. That's something that we do in our family when we have big occasions. We fire off fireworks. So she said to me, "The bat mitzvah is coming. Do you have fireworks arranged?" Well, I turned to the army and they said to me, no. And I turned to experts for fireworks. They said to me, 10,000 shekel, this kind, large sums of money and all kinds of problems. And it was a week before the bat mitzvah. And my mom said to me, "Nu, what's with the fireworks?" And suddenly God put a great thought into my mind. I thought to myself, wait a minute, I have amazing Arab friends here in Hebron and they fire fireworks all the time. So I called my friend, my colleague, even in certain ways a mentor, Sheikh Ashraf Jabri, Hajj Ashraf Jabri, and I said to him, Hajj Ashraf, listen, I need you to fire some fireworks for my daughter's bat mitzvah. He said to me, you want me to buy you some fireworks? I could do that. I said, no, man, I need you to buy them, but then I need you to fire them off at a certain preset time for my daughter's bat mitzvah. Well, this man, who is a very important leader of about 40,000 Arabs in Hebron, not only did he do it, but he felt such an honor that I would ask him to join my occasion, an Arab. And that makes only sense since he invited us, the Hebron leadership, Jewish community leadership of the so-called settlers, to a meal at his house at the end of Ramadan, one of the nights of Ramadan, the iftar meal, and he catered it kosher. And so I returned the favor by asking him to join my simcha, my joyous occasion. And I want to tell you something. It was one of the most beautiful displays of both fireworks and coexistence. And these things, the Hamas side of things and the Ashraf Jabri side of things, they coexist in a tricky situation because the Middle East is complex, and Hebron is one of the most complex aspects of the Middle East.
I think that's a wonderful anecdote that you've shared with us. A lot of people would doubt that on first hearing, but as somebody who's spent more than enough time in Hebron, and as I said, in the other places that I've lived, I actually find that disappointingly unremarkable in a way, that story, right? This is the day-to-day of what actually goes on in the context of many an exchange and interaction between Israelis and Palestinian Arabs. And the issue of kavod, of honor, of respecting those who a lot of people feel that we axiomatically have to have enmity towards, goes an awful long way. People respond well to it. It's rarely extended. There's a lot within the peace process industry that is very patronizing, that robs people of their agency and their own future and their own destiny, both on the Palestinian Arab side and on the Jewish side. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's been such an abject failure. And I'd like to turn to that subject now, which is the peace process industry. And then I'll move on a little bit towards the future as we want to talk about of the Jewish presence there. So the two-state solution, I personally, and I'm just referring to my notes here, I believe that it has traction among the populace, primarily because it is the beholder of an alliterative title. Two-state solution. It rolls off the tongue. People can remember it. People can recite it. And then it's got this wonderful, wonderful tagline, which is two states for two people living side by side in peace and security. But I believe that if one actually challenges a proponent of the two-state solution, not somebody who is involved in the peace process, but somebody who speaks to its virtues, says that they support the two-state solution, I believe if one challenges that individual will quickly be exposed to the reality that they know very, very little about what it actually entails, what the two-state solution actually entails. So I'd like you to tell us, please, what the two-state solution, as it's commonly been understood, actually entails. But I want you to tell us what it entails for the Jewish people in Judea. Take the time to outline that for us, please.
Okay. So the two-state solution has been an idea that's been around now, maybe since the late 70s. It's really kind of gotten traction more and more. At first, it seemed abhorrent, but with time, it became more and more normative. And the idea of the two-state solution is that there are two peoples living on this land, and we should divide this land because these people don't want to live exactly together. There wants to be a Jewish state and a Palestinian state, and the Palestinians have their claims to the land, and the Jews have their claims to the land. And yes, some of those claims overlap in different places, and therefore the best way to do it is to say, let's make a division, let's make a divorce, if you will, or an amicable divorce. Let's give these people this plot of land, let's give these people this plot of land. And so, okay, we've divided the land up and we've made peace, and there are two states that are going to live side by side without war and with mutually recognized borders. So that's the kind of vision that was laid out. But that is a very, very superficial and simplistic assessment of the reality. The first thing is that in the Middle East, and the Palestinians will say this often, justice is very important. History and justice are very important. So for the Jewish people to give up the claims of the heartland of the land of Israel, which really are the places, if Israel is based on its history, the reason that Zionism has any traction is because it has history in this land. Well, if you would be giving up Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, you're actually giving up the very foundations of that history. And so you're undermining the whole story of Israel. So that's aspect number one, that it's unjust. Another aspect is what claim exactly do the Palestinians have? According to books like From Time Immemorial, the majority of Palestinians that came here came really in the last 150 years because they were attracted to the work opportunities that Zionism brought with it. And so the majority of Palestinians, some have claims to hundreds of years on this land, but most don't. And those that do, they were never in a Palestinian state or in an Arab state. They were oftentimes kind of the backwater of a Syrian region or a Turkish region. And so that's, and that especially culminated in the Jordanian occupation of 1948. You know, 1948, Israel declared independence and won independence after a year-long war. But we lost the heartland. We lost the heartland of Israel. For example, the Western Wall. For example, the Mount of Olives. For example, the tomb of Rachel. For example, the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs in Hebron. We lost access to these places, and we lost sovereignty and control of these places. And that was an illegal occupation by a warring state that did not recognize what was already recognized at the San Remo Accords of 1920 and the League of Nations recognition of those accords in what's called the Mandate for Palestine of 1923. And so it was an illegal capture of our land. Now, what happened in 1967? Is it liberation or occupation? For those people who weave a narrative that the Jewish people are foreigners and want to get us off the land, 1967 is an occupation. But for us who believe that this is Jewish, the heart of the Jewish land, that we had purchased many parts of this land, that in 1967 we won it, that it was already recognized by international law as ours, and of course the Bible and God, if you believe that, dictated that this is our land. This was our land, and so 1967, we pushed back the aggressive land grabbers of the Jordanians. But what happened was through the 90s was this other idea of just let's make peace, let's give away this land. But it didn't turn out well. And that's the other side of it. Everything I just said was ideological, but pragmatically, it really didn't work out so well. Not for the Jews, and frankly, not for the majority of Arabs. What do I mean? For the Jews, we received, in exchange for giving away our land, we received a terror war, multiple terror wars, that made driving the roads towards our cities, towards our towns and our communities almost impossible, with daily shootings, rock throwings, etc. The places that came under the control of Yasser Arafat became forward bases of terror. And if you don't have the ability to go back all the way to the late 90s, middle and late 90s and the early 2000s, just go to 2005 and see what happened in the Gaza Strip, which is really the continuation of the Oslo idea, which is surrender land, walk out of land, give them their land, ostensibly, right? And have peace. Well, what happened in Gaza is that we got, instead of peace, forward bases of terror and rocket shooting. We've had already 3 wars with the Hamas Gaza entity. Now, Benjamin, I do not base my will to live in these parts on a need for security. It's not because of security rationales that I think Jews have a right to live in Hebron. I have the rationale that we use to live in places like Hebron is very simple. It's our land. It's our land. And I can give you, I think, 4 or 5 different rationales of why it's our land, but that is the simple claim that we make. It's our land. And we initially fought against the state of Israel's, that we democratically, within our democratic rights, we fought against the state of Israel's Oslo and 2-state solution ideology. Today, the state of Israel is already, the majority of people living in the state of Israel do not accept the idea of land for peace or a 2-state solution. They have reneged that, especially after the Gaza withdrawal. And now we're looking towards an election that's going to have 80 seats out of 120 of people who really don't believe in land giveaway anymore. and the creation of a Palestinian terror state on our land. So there's really a lot of issues there, but you know what? There's one more issue. There's one tiny more issue. And this is an issue that you never hear about, which is Palestinians. They themselves are under the thumb of a super regressive regime that takes away their basic human rights. And when we were leaving Gaza, I was protesting. Arabs were talking to me from behind the fence and saying, don't leave us to be subjugated by these forces. You don't understand what Hamas is. You don't understand what they'll do to our lives. And so many Palestinians that I meet with daily just tell us, first thing, they're angry at us that we've allowed them to be subjugated by the Palestinian Authority. But they say, you empower our enemies, you empower your enemies, and we have no life under this thing. Get us free. What Arabs in Judea and Samaria want most of all is they want a blue residency card. They just want to be residents of Israel. They want a normal life. They want normal freedoms, normal opportunities, upward mobility, and that's what they're looking for. So my Palestinian friends, and by the way, they call the Arabs in Hebron, when talking about the Palestinian Authority, they call them Hamushhatim, which means the corrupt ones. And so that is the reality that they have been forced to live under. As I say, in Hebron, I live in South Korea, and my next door Arab lives in North Korea. That's the situation. I can give you many examples of horrible subjugation that they face, and really no freedoms of speech in order to show what they really want, which is to live decently and to have some Abraham Accords inside Israel.
So that's all very, very important information. Now I've got about 10 minutes to get through my last two questions, and then I'm going to take some audience questions. I just want to
keep it shorter. Yeah.
No, not at all. That's not what I want you to infer. Merely, I'm emphasizing the importance of getting some of the audience questions both live and pre-submitted to you. But I want to push you to educate our audience a little bit more, Yishai, not on the challenges, not on what the wills are of the Palestinian Arabs, but on what the price would be that Jewish settlers, as you call them, I call them members of communities there in Judea and Samaria, would be expected to pay were the two-state solutions come about. And I want you, please, if you're willing to talk about numbers to be removed from their homes, Jerusalem, and also a rend placed within Israeli society, if you believe that one would be, in the event that there is a mass evacuation, some would call it mass expulsion of Jewish people from Judea and Samaria.
Benjamin, I'll answer your question.
In the two-state paradigm.
I'll answer your question, but before I do, I just want to say, the Palestinian Authority and the various iterations of Palestinianism, or organizations that ran Palestinianism, have really been almost always machinery for ethnic cleansing. This was the case of the Jordanian occupation of Jewish land of Judea and Samaria in 1948, and they basically ethnically cleansed any Jews that lived in these places. Not only did they ethnically cleanse the Jews, they also ethnically cleansed any Jewish history of the places. They destroyed synagogues and grave sites and holy places. They just destroyed them. Well, in the old city of Jerusalem, 55 synagogues were destroyed. So that was 1948. In the year in 19, excuse me, I should have gone back beforehand. In 1929, when there was a Palestinian uprising in Hebron against the Jewish community, a massacre, 67 Jews were murdered. The British were in charge there, and they helped the Palestinian, this nascent Palestinian movement ethnically cleanse Hebron from its Jews. So you had in 1929, you had in 48. And then already when the Oslo paradigm came in, Jews were being kicked out of places like the tomb of Joseph in Shechem. They destroyed the tomb of Joseph, and they kicked out all the Jews that were there. So basically, wherever the Palestinian movement comes to, it ethnically cleanses the Jews. So too, were 850,000 Jews were ethnically cleansed.
Incidentally, and the Christians as well, Yishai.
Well, depends. Arab Christians stayed, but have been harassed now for all these years. They're, on the one hand, they're Arabs. On the other hand, they're Christians, and they've been harassed. And so today, 10% of only 10% Christians remain in a town like Bethlehem of what there was originally. So they basically have been bullied and they leave, sometimes murdered, but oftentimes just bullied, and they're forced out. So yeah, that came with time. But first was the Jews, later on was the Christians. And let's not forget the ethnic cleansing that happened to the Jewish people en masse from the Middle East, Arab countries at the advent of the birth of the state of Israel. So 850,000 Jews were expelled from their various countries, if it's Yemen, if it's Egypt, if it's Syria, if it's Lebanon, if it's Iraq. And so Jewish people have been expelled by this thing. And so to me, the idea of the two-state solution is the continuation of that. It's the continuation of expelling Jews. And you're asking me, what is it going to look like? Well, it would look like we have 600,000 Jews living in Eastern Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. Then, 200,000, 300,000 Jews are going to be evicted from their homes. We had an impossible time with just 8,500 Jews evicted from their home. Under a two-state solution, hundreds of thousands would be evicted from their homes. Maybe the big blocks, the quote unquote, settlement blocks would stay under such an agreement, but they would then be under the daily attacks on the roads and on the arteries that lead into these places, which we saw before. And then these places would, like Hebron, would become stages for the larger attacks. Today, people don't attack anymore just with suicide belts. Today, they attack with rockets. And today, Hamas is aligned with Iran. So if a suitcase of a nuclear device would be snuck in from Iran to these places, that would be the front of an attack against Israel. And we would lose so much in the sense of our very heritage, because if we didn't have access to the tomb of the fathers and mothers, which Jewish people have yearned to have access for the last 3,800 years, we would be undoing the very heart of the story of Israel, which is a connection to our heritage, our past, our traditions, our religion. In any case, it's really been tried and tested, and it has failed miserably before. And that's the good news. The good news, Benjamin, is that the truth is that Israelis are not going in that direction. Israelis are not heading towards the direction of two-state solution. The truth is they're heading exactly in the opposite direction. And by the way, so are many, many Palestinians who are voiceless. They too are heading in a different direction. I think I'd get a chance to hear from them often. The truth of the matter is that Israel's heading in a completely different direction, and that direction is sovereignty. Jewish people want more sovereignty. Well, we didn't get a chance to talk about the division of these areas into A, B, and C, which is an Oslo paradigm. But A and B are already controlled by the Palestinian Authority, and now there's an incursion into Area C, with, by the way, support of about 100 million euros coming from the European Union and especially Germany. And these efforts are to build an Area C and also to undermine the good name of Israel, to besmirch the good name of Israel. It's a double-headed monster that tries to undermine both our narrative and our physical presence on the land. And we know what this is. And if you're wondering, Benjamin, what we're talking about here, all you have to do is watch Palestinian Authority television. And that is daily incitement against the occupation. The occupation, and this is a key phrase here, if you want to understand what the Palestinian Authority, not necessarily the average Palestinian, if you want to know what the Palestinian Authority thinks, there is an occupation here, they claim. That occupation started in 1948. There is not one map that the Palestinian Authority produces that is actually of a two-state solution. Its end goal, as its founder's end goal, was the elimination of Israel. And today it is a small clique of a few hundred, quite repressive, well-paid, corrupt politicians and their henchmen who suppress both Palestinians and continue to advocate for the destruction of Israel and for a Palestine to replace Israel.
So Yishai, before I come to my last two questions, can you roll with us to 20 minutes after the hour just to get a little bit more time for the audience? So for you,
Benjamin.
Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
So let me switch to another question here. In February 2017, you wrote a really excellent piece in the New York Times. And you outlined several proposals for the resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Again, I encourage people to read that piece. At the very end of that article, though, you wrote on the then recently departed Secretary of State, John Kerry, with regard to his attitude to resolving the Israel-Palestinian conflict, that Mr. Kerry's mantra that there really is no viable alternative to the two-state solution is contradicted by its manifest failure. With a new American administration in power, you're referring to the Trump administration then that had just taken the reins, there is an historic opportunity to have an open discussion of real alternatives. Now, you were referring to the Trump administration. As I say, there was a lot of hope, a lot of optimism about the idea that with the entry of that administration would be witnessed the departure of the two-state paradigm. That, in my opinion, is not at all what happened. We did not see a departure from the two-state paradigm. In actual fact, if people read the Trump administration's plan for the resolution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict, they will be struck, if they read it with open eyes, they will be struck by just how much of a departure from that optimism it actually reflects. It calls for the establishment of the state for the Palestinian Arabs in Judea and Samaria. It calls for further land concessions. It calls for the partitioning of Jerusalem and that the eastern part, which would go to the Palestinian Arabs, being called Al-Quds, and it does so in writing. And it also calls for the reconciliation and to the Jewish people with the idea that Jewish people can stay living among Palestinian Arabs in an independent Palestinian state, albeit with Israeli citizenship, but really at the mercy of an authority which you have just described is very wont to engaging with ethnic cleansing of Jewish people. What went wrong with that plan? Where was the settler movement? I'm not including you in that, but I saw a number of members of the settler movement, leaders of that movement, who call themselves leaders of the settler movement, applauding that plan in the White House when it was unveiled. I saw leaders of the evangelical community applauding that plan when it was unveiled in the White House. What went wrong? And is there a problem whereby individuals like you, Yishai, face a complete lack of understanding among many who ought to be your kinsmen and your brethren ideologically, namely Jewish people in the diaspora? Because we ought not to forget that that plan, and you can certainly agree or disagree with my description of it, but that plan was penned by three Orthodox Jews in collaboration with the Prime Minister of the State of Israel and so forth, but Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, David Friedman. These are Orthodox Jews who penned a plan that calls for the state with land concessions and the partition of Jerusalem. What is going on?
First thing, Benjamin, great question. And you brought me back to those heady times, that heady period of the Trump administration. While I completely agree with your characterization of the plan itself, I a bit disagree with you with your characterization of the whole Trump administration as being that plan. Because if we look back and we remember the Trump administration, we made tremendous gains, and they were in fact kinsmen. So the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that was huge. And the recognition of the Golan Heights as part of Israel, that was huge. And for our purposes and purposes of this discussion, the recognition of Jewish rights in Judea, that we're not foreigners, that we're not occupiers, that we are legitimate people on this land, legitimate sovereigns in this land, was also part of it. That was what we called the Pompeo Doctrine. And it was the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, who announced that that the United States no longer deems a Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria is illegal under international law, and later also went so far as to recognize goods made by Israelis in Judea and Samaria as marked Israeli and not anything else. So there was tremendous gains, and there's many more that I could talk about, and we made tremendous headway. Now, with regarding to this plan, first thing is, you're absolutely right that there were many settler leaders who applauded that. Now, look, it was a tough political moment. You had a great, ally of Israel and of Jewish rights in Judea, and he, unveiled his plan. So they kind of felt the need to stand up and give it homage. And there was a few who really did believe that, including some people that I know very closely. But I am numbered amongst the people who said, even before the plan came out, we told the Trump administration, we are your friends, you are our allies, we are your allies, but if you call for a two-state solution, even in a fancy language, a document that also puts a lot of onus and burden on the Palestinian Authority, we will try as hard as we can to block it. We will stand up against it. We will not allow such a thing to pass. And that's exactly what we did. And you can refer to my article in Newsweek, which was called something like, President Trump, you're better
Trump is better than a two-state solution.
Right. Trump is better than a two-state solution. And you know what? I want to tell you something. That article was in Newsweek. It didn't win me a lot of friends in the administration when that came out. Okay. They gave me, it was butting heads. But I said what I meant, and what I said is, I respectfully want to tell you, President Trump, you're better than this. You're not going to, you're supposed to be like a reformer, a person who's thinking out of the box. Don't bring back the old boxed idea of the two-state solution. It's absurd. It's silly. And look, can I tell you something? It got flushed down the toilet, just like the rest of the two-state solution documents. And so many documents have been written, went down the toilet. I don't think that it was President Trump's shining moment. There are other people in my camp who will say to you, yes, but there was tremendous concessions that were made in that plan to recognize Jewish rights and to limit the Palestinian Authority and to take take away their teeth, to defang them. That's right. So there was a lot of that, but yeah, it was not a beautiful moment. Amongst many beautiful moments that existed in the Trump administration, it was not a beautiful moment, but we were prepared for it. We were prepared for it. And there were, by the way, many in the evangelical community who applauded on screen, but gave the president a very hard time. And they said, how could you have bought into this plan, which was really, as you kind of very correctly stated, was really written, well, by Prime Minister Netanyahu, by Kushner, by Greenblatt, less so by David Friedman, but these people are people that still hold on to the two-state solution, and they can't think creatively past it. I was brought into the White House in order to give them alternatives to the two-state solution, in order to explain to them why it's a mistake. And sadly, they came up with the old formula again. And that formula is so silly because it's not going to happen. Some people say that he only did it in order to just kind of show that the Palestinians would never accept such a thing. But you know what? There was no need for that either. It would have been much more exciting to see the dismantlement of the Palestinian Authority, the assertion of, oh, you know what else I didn't get to say? I forgot to say one thing this whole time, Benjamin, which is actually the two-state solution has already taken place fully. And that is a huge chunk of land that was going to be the land of Israel was cut away and was created into a Palestine. It was subsequently named Jordan, but it is a country that has 80% Palestinians, and it was cut away from land that was recognized as Jewish by international law, by international community, and given away to the Palestinian Arabs. So we've already accepted the two-state solution, and it would have been much more exciting for Trump to be like, hey, there is a two-state solution, and now let's give these Arabs that live in Israel, let's give them residency, let's give them maybe local city rule and other ideas that are out there. But sadly, you're right, there's a very calcified idea that's out there, and I make no excuses. We're going to continue to fight against it. Certainly with a Biden administration, we're going to have to fight even harder because in our mind, the Biden administration is just an Obama administration version 3, right? We had 2 Obama administrations. This is, to us, the 3rd one with many of the Obama staff inside the Biden administration. And so, yeah, we're going to have to fight that language, especially the Obama-Biden drafted Security Council Resolution 2334. Is that right? 2334?
That was the resolution that came out in Hanukkah of 2019, just the first night Hanukkah 2019, where it gave the state of Israel a good kicking
right.
as the Obama administration exited from the presidency, and I remember that very, very clearly.
And the kicking was specifically about the illegality of Jewish presence in Judea.
Yes.
That was the main.
A vote on which the United States abstained, therefore allowing it to pass. They didn't endorse it, but they abstained rather than vetoing it. And
most people believe that they were behind the very writing of the document itself.
Yes,
that's right. So we're back to the same thing. Look, Benjamin, b'sofo shel davar, at the end of the day, we're going to have to keep fighting. We're going to have to keep fighting. Today, my fight is not only for Jewish rights, it's also for decencies and rights of Arabs who are under the thumb of the Palestinian Authority. but it's a fight for justice. And you're right, not everybody understands it. Not everybody understands it. And before the show, you alluded to me that sometimes speakers in my position are very defensive because a lot of people are against this. I hope not to be overly defensive. I think we're living in a great time, in a time of great revelation, of great light, of a great gift of the Jewish people's return and ingathering to the land of Israel, and the development of the cities of Judea, which is like a Jewish blessings. You should see, the cities of Judea come to life again. We're seeing that, but at the same time, we have a tough battle. The only big difference now is the state of Israel is so successful that so many Arabs around this region, including those part of the Abraham Accords, and I'm hearing now rumors of things coming out of Egypt, the Arabs are looking and they're saying to themselves, there's no point in fighting this war. Israel is strong and it's not going anywhere. And if we keep fighting it, we just lose. Let's team up with those guys. Let's accept the fact that they're here to stay, and let's have a Semitic alliance, an Abrahamic alliance for betterment. Let's stop the proxy war of Palestine against the Jews, and instead, if not embrace, accept the Jews and start living a better life here in the Middle East.
So my last question before we take audience questions, I'm going to ask Alan, when we turn to the audience, please unmute Harold, who has a question, and then after Harold, we'll unmute Al, who has a question. But Yishai, I just want to say that we had a similar experience. We were brought into the White House. I remember going to advise the campaign while it was still a campaign in Trump Tower. And the individual, I'm not going to say who it was, said to us, and these are exactly his words, the candidate, he was referring to candidate Trump at the time, the candidate does not endorse the two-state solution. Do you have an alternative? And we presented an alternative, and we continued to present an alternative. We then met with them on several subsequent occasions, expressing the very same. It seems to me interesting, and I'll have to just make this comment and move on to my last question, but it seems to me very, very interesting that Orthodox members of the Jewish community overseas were able to draft a plan such as that, and yet those with deeply religious Christian beliefs within the administration never really got close to the plan, right? And I feel that that is probably, while there will be politicking there as well, probably because a Jew in the diaspora is bludgeoned into holding and acting in accordance with a minority mentality. And they will bend to pressures. Not all of them. There are many, many who are very, very proud, and they're warriors and defenders of the state of Israel. But there are a great many who have just been beaten down by anti-Semitism, beaten down by the unwillingness of the communities around them to truly give them acceptance within the countries in which they build their homes. Whereas the Christian members of that administration, I'm talking about people who absolutely should have had their fingerprints on it, people like Secretary of State Pompeo, people like Vice President Pence, they seemed unwilling to get too involved with that particular plan. And I believe that it speaks to their convictions. I say that with a bit of a heavy heart.
Yes.
And I believe it speaks to a lack of conviction among some members of the Orthodox Jewish community and other strains and strands of the Jewish community in the diaspora. I'll have to move on to my last question.
I'll just say,
very,
I just want to,
if you would.
very, very tight. I'll keep
Please.
it, which is sometimes I find myself in Congress, and congressmen will say to me, yeah, but my Jewish colleague congressman, says that you're occupiers or they believe in a two-state solution. And I just say to them, Congressman, those folks are related to us. They're our beloved family, but they don't have a right to tell you what's going to be with the state of Israel. They have a right to tell you, but you should discount what they're telling you, because we're the ones with on the ground. We're the ones living with the security situation. We're the ones upholding the tradition and heritage. We're the fighters on the ground. And so those other people, okay, they have a closeness to it, but it would behoove you to listen to us, since we're the people really dealing with these issues. And the other people, they have other considerations, especially looking good towards liberalism and other ideologies that are in their head that are not really to do with the situation on the ground.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting subject, but perhaps one that you'll come back and discuss with me again in another conversation. Yishai, I'd be very pleased to have you for that discussion. I'd like to ask Harold my last question for you, in a very tight nutshell, what's the future of the Jewish presence in Judea?
The future of Jewish presence in Judea is one to continue to grow. And we're looking forward to the situation where both the Palestinian Authority and also its kind of Jewish defender, its kind of sister component, which is the civil administration, will be dismantled, and that Judea and Samaria will be part of normal Israel, with the Arab population having a way to matriculate into Israel, hopefully as residents, maybe citizens of Jordan, with upward mobility and opportunity. Of course, those that put down their arms and relinquish the jihadist ideology. I think that the Jewish people are tenacious. We're stiff-necked about holding on to Judea, and we've just been growing. We're going to continue to grow. We have a great tenacity, and we're educating our next generations to continue that passion. But I will also answer your question in a very tight nutshell. What is peace in the Middle East? What is peace in the Middle East? I think the answer to peace in the Middle East is a strong Jewish state on its borders, surrounded by strong Arab states on their borders, in cooperation towards a better region. I know that sounds very simplistic, but that's actually the simple answer. A strong Jewish state in its land, surrounded by Arab states in their lands, and a Semitic Abrahamic region that cooperates.
You know, simple things are often the way, Yishai. Not always are they easy, but they're simple. And it does not mean that we should desist from the hard work to bring about a simple outcome that actually can resolve this. So I want to ask, we're going to take 2 questions. I'm going to limit it to that. I'm not going to take the pre-written questions, I'm afraid. I would like, Alan, could you please unmute Harold? Harold, you've got 15 seconds to ask your question of Yishai. And Yishai, can I ask for a short answer just out of deference to your time? Thank you. Go for it, Harold.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for bringing this important topic to the forefront. My question is, putting extremist views aside and looking at, quote, reasonable people who happen to have a different opinion than ours, do you really think there are arguments out there that will convince them that, number one, Israel has a right to the land, and that, number two, swapping land for peace is not going to solve anything?
That's a very
much, Harold. Yishai.
Thank you, Harold. That is an interesting way you put that question. It's an interesting question. I think so. I mean, look, we live right now in a polarized time. If you just talk about like the vaccines, people flip out, or American elections, people flip out. So it's a very polarized time. But forums like this one, I think people want to hear it, and oftentimes all you have to do is kind of, if you're willing to say to people, yeah, there are problems. Like, for example, in my New York Times article, I wrote all my 5 alternative solutions that I wrote down. They all have a stinky element in them. They all have a repugnant element. But I said that honestly, like, there's a repugnant element, but let's move forward because there's a more repugnant element with the situation as it is right now. I think that history is with us. I think our justice is with us, and therefore people who are seeking truth and justice will see it, will at least appreciate. And I've spoken to thousands of groups, including tough groups, and oftentimes including J Street and other groups on the far left and others. And you know what? I think there's always somebody who's willing to hear something. But finally, to answer your question, Harold, Israel's very success is one of the things that answers a certain question. I say this to Arabs all the time. I say, shuf, look with your eyes. I say to them, Allah wills it. Look at it. It is successful. But there's no point in fighting against it. And Israel's very successful militarily and economically and spiritually. As you could see, the children are going the ways of the fathers and mothers. That is also seen by the eyes of the world and the eyes of the Arabs. And they're seeking peace because it's just now become economically and morally more viable in their eyes.
Thank you very much, Yishai. I'd like to ask Pamela now to please ask her question. Alan, if you can unmute Pamela. Pamela, you've got 15 seconds to ask your question of Yishai, please. Bear with us, Yishai. Hopefully Pamela will unmute. If Pamela doesn't unmute, we will move on to Al. Pamela, are you able to ask your question?
Yes, I'm here now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Yishai, what can we do to help the people, the Jewish community of Hebron?
It's a great question. First thing is that the first thing to do to help the Jewish community of Hebron is to want to be part of the heritage, the first thing I recommend everybody do is read the book of Genesis, read the chapter 23 of the book of Genesis, be part of the story, want to be part of the story. The next thing is, next time you come to Israel, you got to tell your tour guides and your tour companies or whoever, we're going to Hebron. Reach out to me, reach out to our organization, the Hebron Fund, HEBRONFUND, hebronfund.org, and say, I want a tour. We do a tour in non-corona times. We have a tour, at least an English tour once a week, if not twice a week in heavy times. We bring you in on a protected bus, and we take you to the tomb of Rachel and then the tomb of the forefathers and mothers. Come and see it for yourself. That's the most important thing. And then afterwards, of course, there's financial aid that always helps us, and all Jewish organizations need strengthening. But when you strengthen Hebron, you're really doing the mitzvah of kibud av v'em, honoring the fathers and the mothers, because you're honoring the forefathers and mothers of our peoplehood. And that's really done through hebronfund.org. And I appreciate the question. More than anything, don't be afraid of the pressure that you're going to feel at the water cooler and on campus. One of the ways that we're going to win is by speaking proudly. As Benjamin said before, words matter, and for words to matter, courage matters. You need courage, and this forum is a courageous form of trying to talk about the truth. Say your truth, and people will maybe push back a little, and then they'll start hearing you. Thank you for that question.
Our last question is Al. Al, if you can ask your question of Yishai, you have 15 seconds. You are about to be unmuted. Yishai, as soon as he asks that, I'll give you 2 minutes if you would to respond. Al, the floor is yours. Please ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
We hear you great.
I recently saw a report of a survey of Israelis saying that 70% of Israelis would be willing to give up Hebron. My question is, how is this possible? Are they more interested in Tel Aviv only?
Okay, Al, great question. First thing I want you to know that I am a Jew who loves Tel Aviv. When Benjamin said before that he lived in Bat Yam, I felt a pang of jealousy because he lived by the beach, and the whole land is so great, and we really have to be so careful not to subdivide amongst ourselves, which Jews are wont to do. We're really one country, from Tel Aviv to Eilat to Hebron to the Hermon. That's one. Second thing is, it was Shimon Peres who said about Poles. He said Poles. He had a lot of quips. He was great at one-liners. He said Poles are like perfume, good to smell, but don't drink it. Okay. And what I mean to say is, what you read, that there's a poll that said 70% of Israelis are willing to give up Hebron. That's absurd. And there's a simple way for me to tell you that. And that is, the greatest poll of them all in Israel is elections. And so in elections, out of 120 seats, we're going to have 80 seats that are so-called right-wing or nationalist, and that's if you take out the Arab parties who vote for Arab constituents who vote for Arab parties, it's even a larger percentage than 80 out of 120. It's a large percentage of Israelis who believe that land giveaway is a bad idea and the Jewish people should be strong. Now, where I will agree with you, Al, or will commiserate that there's a problem, and that is, I actually think that people don't know the Bible. And I don't mean necessarily to believe in God, although that would be nice. I'm also a rabbi. But what I mean to say is that these are our foundational stories. These are the the Aboriginals, the Aborigines in Australia, they call it they're like dream stories or dream creations. It's like this is the foundations where when you read these stories, you understand everything. The word Hebron means something to you when you read the Bible, and so does Shiloh, and so does Beitel, et cetera, et cetera. And so Israelis are actually quite uneducated about our own tradition, and therefore our identity is weak. If I have never read the Bible, then the word Hebron probably means an Arab city full of and Jewish extremists and violence, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to get back to loving our culture, loving our heritage, enjoying it. It is beautiful. It is, by the way, on the one hand, ours and very much about particular, but it's also inclusive in many ways. Like, for example, the story that I told you about Ishmael and Isaac bearing their shared father Abraham. And so there's a beauty, there's a richness there. And if the Jewish people don't know their culture, then they don't understand what they're fighting and standing up for. Our Christian friends, our American Protestant Christian friends, the so-called evangelicals, one of the reasons that they're so much in line with us is because they read the Bible. And so they see the promises of the Bible, of the ingathering of the exiles, coming true in our time. So, and sometimes Jews don't believe that Christians have good motivations. They think that that Christians have other motivations. So I tell my colleagues a lot of times, I'm like, people out there just read the Bible and they're like, God says he's going to ingather the Jews to the land of Israel and rebuild the cities of Judea. I think I see it happening in the news. Gosh, it looks like God is doing what he promised. So I really recommend to folks to just, start this Passover, start reading the Bible. If you want Exodus to match the story of Pesach, great. But it's a great book. It's a great story, and it'll juice you up. And of course, the other thing is to come and visit. One of the things that there's a problem with Israelis is that many Israelis don't get to these places. That's why, just like when Benjamin was in the army, I hope he was treated well in Hebron. We put tremendous efforts through the Chabad of Hebron and the Hebron Fund. We put tremendous effort to make sure that 4 months that the soldier from Tel Aviv is going to be in Hebron, he's going to have a magical time and remember it forever as a place where he felt the love and he protected the core Jewish story. So thank you, Al.
Thank you very much, Yishai. I will just share with you two things. First of all, it's not dissimilar to what we see in the United States of America. There are people on either coast in the United States of America who have real convictions and real presumptions, or flawed presumptions rather, about what heartland America is all about. And it's not dissimilar to that. When I think about Hebron, it's the heartland of Israel. Judea and Samaria is the heartland of the Jewish story. And yet you have people on the coast who've never so much as been there, but they have a very, very clear-cut view about what's going on there, what's not going on there, whether it should remain, whether it should not remain. We see this tendency, unfortunately, writ large across the international community. People of the same nation, of a shared past and a common future, casting aspersions and making presumptions about their brethren. It's very, very unfortunate, and I see it happening far too often, far too regularly. The other thing that I want to say is our organization every year brings the Israel Law and Policy, the ILAP tour, to the States of Israel, and among other places, we take them to Shiloh. We hope to be launching that tour this year. If the world turns, we will be launching that tour. That's where, Yishai, we bring graduates and doctoral candidates from around the world who have a commitment to public service, who hold academic excellence in their hands. And we show them the state of Israel through a law and policy lens. As I said, traditionally, we bring them to Shiloh. I think together with Rosita, what we will do is we will add the Hebron tour. So we will not do one instead of the other. We will add the Hebron tour to the itinerary this year, if we can get that off the ground, COVID permitting. And I look forward to seeing you there with our delegation. And I just want to bring this to a conclusion by expressing a couple of votes of thanks. First of all, to Rosita, my colleague and co-founder. Thank you, Rosita, so very much. She, together with I, decided that we must start to bring representation from people like you here at the Miriam Institute, people of religious conviction, historical understanding, legal understanding, and also the willingness to speak out and to do so proudly, and who live what they speak. So we're very pleased to have you here, Yishai. You are always welcome at the Miriam Institute. We want to thank our colleague in common, Mr. Alan Langer. We want to thank you, Yishai, for being with us, for being so gracious with your time. You've ran a full 90 minutes, 90. Thank you so very much for giving of your insights on this important topic. Most importantly, to our listening audience, we greatly appreciate you giving us the opportunity to put Yishai's perspectives to you for your consideration. We hope that you will indeed chew those over. We hope that you'll contact us with your feedback, and we hope that you will continue to engage with Israel through the Miriam Institute. Remember, wherever you are politically, wherever you are physically, you can engage with Israel through the Miriam Institute. Thank you so much, Yishai. We're grateful to you.
Benjamin, thank you, and thank the Miriam Institute, and happy Pesach to you and all of your folks. Keep up the great work.
Amen. All the very best. Bye-bye.